If you've been following the news this week, you know the world changed profoundly. Or maybe, just maybe, what we saw was the final chapter of a story that was already written.
We are talking, of course, about the news that just dominated everything on January 3rd, 2026, the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro by U.S. forces.
It was a swift, surgical military operation. But what makes this so critical and so worthy of a deep dive is the context. This didn't just happen. Our sources all emphasized this intervention followed nearly a decade of what they call financial suffocation.
Right. And that leads to the core question, the one that sort of challenges how we think about power. How do you neutralize a country that is sitting on the world's largest oil reserves?
The numbers are just staggering. 303 billion barrels of proven reserves.
That's 17% of the entire planet's supply. On paper, they should have been untouchable. They should have had all the leverage.
So our mission today, as we go through these reports, is to really understand the hidden financial architecture, the invisible machinery that made this economic collapse almost inevitable long before any military action was even on the table.
And the proof is right there in the aftermath. Secretary of State Marco Rubio came out and said, despite the regime change, the oil embargo and financial walls, they're staying up.
And that one statement tells you everything. The real lock on Venezuela's wealth isn't a military blockade. It's those financial walls. The country was, for all intents and purposes, economically dead years ago. This strike was, well, it was the epilogue.
So let's start with that. Let's establish the asymmetry of power here, going all the way back to 2017.
Right. So on one side, you have Venezuela. They have the physical asset. They have the oil. They are an oil superpower.
They have the inventory. But here's the catch, the non-negotiable part of all this. Oil is a dollar-denominated asset. And the U.S. doesn't just print the dollar. They own the entire highway system it travels on. The rails, as they're called. That means the clearinghouses, the payment networks, and crucially, the correspondent banks. It's the invisible plumbing of global commerce.
So it's the classic difference between owning an asset and controlling access to its value. Venezuela has the inventory, the biggest warehouse in the world.
But the U.S. has the key to the vault.
I think the best analogy we found in the source material is about liquidity versus assets. Imagine you own this massive warehouse, floor to ceiling, just packed with the most valuable stuff on earth. That's Venezuela.
Right, an asset superpower.
But the United States owns the only cash register in the entire marketplace, the only one that everyone trusts. Every single buyer, whether they're in India or Switzerland, has to swipe their card through that U.S.-regulated machine.
So if the owner of that machine decides to, change your Wi-Fi password, the warehouse doors can be wide open. You can have tankers ready to go.
But you can't get paid.
You can't get paid. The buyers can't settle the transaction. The assets are effectively frozen, not by military force, but by digital architecture.
Okay, so that brings us to the actual mechanism, the financial kill switch.
Uh-huh.
What exactly is this invisible architecture that gives the U.S. such, well, total control?
It all comes down to something called correspondent banking. This is the absolute bedrock of global finance.
So break that down for us.
Okay. So when a bank in Germany needs to send dollars to a bank in Japan, that transaction doesn't go direct. It has to pass through or touch two banks that hold big dollar accounts in the U.S., usually New York.
And because it touches New York, even for a nanosecond, it falls under U.S. jurisdiction.
Precisely. The vast majority of global dollar trades, even between two non-U.S. companies, touch a U.S.-regulated bank.
Right.
And that gives the Treasury Department a weapon of unbelievable power. They can go to a huge European bank and say, process a transaction for Venezuela, and you lose access to the entire dollar system.
Which, for a global bank, is a death sentence.
It's an immediate, total death sentence.
And looking at the timeline, they use this weapon with just methodical efficiency. It started slow, a tightening of financial access in 2017, but that was just a warm-up.
The real kill switch was 2019. That's when the Treasury sanctioned PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company. That's not a slap on the wrist. That's like cutting the spinal cord of the economy.
So let's tick off what happened. First, $7 billion in Venezuelan assets in U.S. banks. Frozen. Gone overnight.
Liquidity just vanishes. And second, and this is a detail that's so important but often gets missed, U.S. firms were banned from exporting refining chemicals to Venezuela.
Ah, so it was a physical chokehold, too.
Exactly. They have this heavy crude oil that needs these special diluents to be processed and sold. So even if they could find a buyer willing to risk it, their product was becoming unusable.
It's sort of brilliant in the terrifying way. The U.S. didn't have to send a single ship. They just sent a message to every bank in the world. Clear their payments and we will cut you off.
And the result was immediate. Global banks ghosted Venezuela. I mean, literally. Phone calls not returned, wire transfers just vanishing into the ether. It wasn't political for the banks, it was just risk management. Venezuela became radioactive.
And that brings up the example from the source material about India, a neutral trading partner. They were owed nearly $1 billion by Venezuela for oil they'd already received.
And they couldn't get it. A sovereign nation couldn't collect $1 billion debt because the payment couldn't clear the system without breaking U.S. sanctions. It was a wake-up call for everyone. It forced them and others to just pull back. It's not about finding a new buyer anymore. It's about finding a whole new monetary system. And this ghosting didn't just affect trade deals. It cascaded. It crippled the entire state, which, leads us to the next phase, the total economic annihilation of the country.
Oil was everything. It was 95% of their export revenue. So when that dollar access evaporated, the dominoes fell so fast.
Without dollars, you can't import spare parts for your pipelines. They started to decay. You can't get those refining chemicals we just talked about. And crucially, you can't get maritime insurance for your tankers. No legitimate buyer will touch an uninsured cargo.
So the whole physics system just seizes up.
It grinds to a halt because the financial lubrication is gone.
And the numbers that follow are they're hard to comprehend. Oil production collapses by 77%. It plummets from a peak of 3.5 million barrels a day to, barely 800,000 today.
That is an instantaneous erasure of almost your entire national income.
And that's where the financial warfare becomes a human catastrophe. The government still has to pay the army. It has to buy food. With no dollars coming in, what's the only thing they can do?
They turn on the printing press.
But the currency, the bolivar, has no anchor. There are no export dollars backing it up, so it just becomes worthless paper.
And you get hyperinflation on a scale that is almost unimaginable. The figure cited is 5 million %.
5 million %.
Money becomes confetti. People's life savings just erased. The country was economically paralyzed years before the January 3rd strike. It was already a ghost.
If we pull back, this whole situation is being studied not just as geopolitics, but as a masterclass in risk management failure for every CFO, every treasury professional on the planet.
That's a critical way to look at it, absolutely. Forget the sovereign nation for a second and think of Venezuela's oil company, PDVSA, as a massive corporation, and it just failed on every single metric of risk management, catastrophically.
So what are the lessons here? What's the checklist that every corporate treasurer should be looking at now?
Well, the sources lay out 4 critical risks that just came together in a perfect storm.
Let's run through them. The first 2 seem almost entry level. Concentration risk, 95% of your revenue from one product. And settlement risk, all that revenue is in a currency you don't control.
Right. But you'd be surprised how many companies and countries are exposed like that. It's foundational, but it's the start of the collapse.
Okay, but the third one, custodial risk. This one is fascinating. Why would they keep their assets, that crucial $7 billion in banks, that were ultimately under U.S. jurisdiction?
Because that's how the dollar system works. To get paid in dollars, you need accounts within the dollar system. And the safest, most liquid places for those dollars are, within reach of the U.S. Treasury. They took a risk, and they lost. They trusted a custodian who was also their adversary.
It's like your insurance company having the power to just cancel your policy and keep all your money.
Exactly. And the fourth one, counterparty risk, ties it all together. They relied entirely on those correspondent banks, those counterparties that were all ultimately beholden to the U.S., a single point of failure.
So it all comes back to that core idea, 303 billion barrels of assets, what you own, but zero liquidity, which you can actually use. The vault was full, but the U.S. Treasury changed the combination lock.
And that's why the outlook, even now, is so bleak. One of the economists cited in the reports, Francisco Rodriguez, he said that just to get production back to 2 million barrels a day would take $10 billion a year in investment.
$10 billion that they can't access from a financial system that won't touch them. It's not a recovery plan. It's a requiem.
And you have to understand the implications of this are being felt everywhere. This isn't just a story about Venezuela. It's a live case study being dissected in every finance ministry from Beijing to Brussels. They're all asking the same question.
Could this happen to us?
Exactly. If a country with the world's biggest oil reserves can be choked out with a few keystrokes, what does that mean for us?
And we are seeing the answer to that. We are seeing countries actively building parallel financial rails to get away from dollar dependency.
You see it everywhere. Central banks are dumping U.S. treasuries and buying gold at record rates. They're holding more Chinese yuan. They're exploring bilateral trade deals that cut out the dollar entirely.
And they're building the infrastructure. China's built CIPS, its own payment system. Russia has SPFS. After getting burned for that $1 billion, India is now aggressively trying to settle trade in rupees.
The goal is simple. They need a plan B. If the U.S. decides to weaponize the SWIFT network or the New York clearinghouses, they need another highway to move their money. They are trying to build a system that is immune to that access denied moment.
And it's not just governments. This is forcing CFOs at major corporations to stress test their own vulnerabilities.
They're running these scenarios now. What if our main banking channel gets cut off because of a political dispute? How do we pivot? Can we settle in yuan? Can we use CIPS? Relying on one country's financial plumbing is now seen as, maybe the biggest business risk out there.
So at the end of the day, this whole deep dive isn't really about oil or politics. It's about dependency. Power in 2026 doesn't flow from an oil well. It flows through fiber optic cables and correspondent banking relationships.
And to just summarize the core insight from all our sources, the military strike on January 3rd was the epilogue. The story was written years before by the financial architecture.
The moment that truly defined Venezuela's collapse wasn't a battle. It wasn't a speech. It was a silent, digital message flashing on trading screens in every bank around the world. Access denied.
Venezuela proved something that commodity-rich nations are still trying to process. Resources don't create power. Architecture does.
And as every major economy watches this unfold, the urgent question in boardrooms and government offices isn't just about sanctions. It's about who controls the rails. And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to consider.
The next great war might not be fought over a border. It might be fought over who controls the global payment system. And for every nation still reliant on a single set of rails, the fear is real. Are we next?